Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever felt like you're working harder to keep a relationship alive than the other person is? Like you're pouring your heart, your time, your energy into someone who gives you just enough to keep you hanging on, but never enough to truly feel secure. The truth is, when love is right, it doesn't feel like you're constantly pushing a boulder uphill. It flows, it builds, it grows. But when it's wrong, the signs are subtle, almost invisible, until one day you realize you've been forcing something that was never meant to last. Today, I'm going to show you how to spot those quiet warning signals so you can stop wasting your energy on the wrong person and open yourself to the love that actually feels effortless. And when you're in a relationship, there's a difference between effort and forcing. Effort is healthy. Effort is showing up for someone, being willing to work through challenges, giving your time and energy to nurture love. Forcing, on the other hand, is when you constantly feel like you're dragging the relationship uphill, when every step forward feels like resistance rather than flow. And the truth is, most of us don't recognize when we've crossed that line. We confuse persistence with compatibility. We confuse hope with reality. And before we know it, we're clinging to something that isn't nourishing us, believing that if we just try a little harder, it will suddenly become what we dreamed of. And one of the first subtle signs you're forcing a relationship is when you find yourself making excuses for their lack of effort. Think about it. How many times have you explained to yourself why they didn't call, why they didn't text back, why they cancelled on you yet again? You tell yourself they're busy, they're stressed, they just have a lot going on. But deep down, you know that if someone truly values you, they'll carve out the time. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing that you matter. When you're constantly justifying their behavior to yourself, you're carrying the weight of the relationship on your shoulders because you're the one making sense of their absence instead of experiencing their presence. And another subtle sign is when you feel like you're always the one adjusting. Relationships do require compromise, but compromise is meant to go both ways. When you're always the one who shifts your schedule, always the one who gives up what you want, always the one who bends so they don't have to, that's not compromise, that's self-erasure. Pay attention to how often you're silencing your own needs just to keep the peace or to keep them happy. If you're always the one folding yourself into smaller and smaller shapes to fit into their life, it's not love, it's contortion. And then there's the silence of unmet needs. You know the things you want. Maybe you want reassurance, deeper communication, more quality time, or affection that feels real and consistent. But when you bring those needs up, you're made to feel like you're too much. You're told you're needy, dramatic, difficult. So you start holding it in. You stop asking for what you need because every time you do, it turns into an argument, or worse, it turns into guilt. That silence you sit in, that voice in your head telling you not to speak up because it will only push them further away. That's not partnership, that's suppression. And it leaves you lonelier in the relationship than you'd be on your own. And pay attention to how you feel when you leave them. Do you feel energized, safe and seen? Or do you feel drained, second-guessing yourself, replaying every word to check if you upset them? That's not what love should do. Love is supposed to be a safe harbor, not a storm you're always bracing yourself for. If every interaction leaves you doubting yourself instead of building you up, that's a sign you're forcing it. And here's another subtle but powerful indicator, the ratio of giving to receiving. When you're the one always initiating, always checking in, always planning, always making sure things are okay, you start to realize that the relationship only exists because of your constant input. Imagine pulling back your energy for just a moment. Does the relationship still move forward or does it fall flat? Because if it collapses without your effort, what you have isn't two people building together, it's you single-handedly holding it all up. And then there's the lack of joy. Relationships should have hard moments, sure, but they should also bring you happiness. If most of your time together feels heavy, complicated, tense, or filled with doubt, ask yourself, when was the last time I truly felt joy with this person? When was the last time I felt free in their presence instead of constrained? The absence of joy is a sign that the relationship is no longer serving you. You're working at it like a job, clocking in and out, but forgetting that love is meant to feel like connection, not obligation. And here's the truth. When you're forcing a relationship, you begin to live on potential instead of reality. You tell yourself, maybe one day they'll change. Maybe when life settles down, they'll treat me differently. Maybe when they finally realize what I mean to them, it'll all be worth it. But potential is a dangerous drug. It keeps you hooked on the idea of what could be while ignoring what is. And what is right now is you not being fulfilled. You deserve a love that exists in the present, not in the fantasy of the future. And another subtle sign is that your self-worth becomes tied to their moods. When they're affectionate, you feel secure. When they're distant, you feel anxious and inadequate. Your emotional state rises and falls on how they treat you that day. That's not stability, that's volatility. And it's not because you're weak, it's because you're hum. And when someone you care about gives you inconsistent affection, your nervous system goes into survival mode, always scanning for danger, always trying to earn back their approval. That roller coaster keeps you hooked, but it's not love, it's anxiety disguised as passion. And you may even notice that your friends or family are walking on eggshells around you. They don't say what they see because they know you're sensitive about it. But listen carefully. If the people who love you most hesitate to speak up, it's often because they sense you're investing in something that's slowly breaking you. The outside perspective you try to ignore is often the clearest one. And a relationship shouldn't make you question your worth. It shouldn't make you feel like you're always auditioning for love. It shouldn't make you believe that the only way to keep someone is by shrinking yourself, lowering your standards, and accepting breadcrumbs of affection. Love is not meant to feel like begging. Love is not meant to feel like bargaining. And so ask yourself, am I pouring more into this than I'm receiving back? Am I silencing myself more than I'm speaking up? Am I constantly chasing moments of validation that never last? These questions aren't easy to face, but they're necessary because the cost of forcing a relationship is yourself. The longer you fight for something that doesn't fit, the more you lose sight of who you are. And here's the most important thing to remember. It's not about whether they're a bad person or not. They don't have to be cruel or toxic for them to be the wrong person for you. Sometimes it's simply misalignment. Sometimes it's just that you want different things or that they can't love you in the way you need to be loved. And if you keep holding on despite that misalignment, you're only delaying the happiness you could find with someone who actually matches you. And love should not feel like a constant battle just to prove you deserve to be there. It should not feel like dragging someone up the hill of your relationship. It should feel like two people choosing every day to walk side by side. And the subtle signs that you're forcing it, they're not whispers to ignore. They're alarms to wake you up. Because the moment you start listening to them is the moment you stop fighting for the wrong person and finally create space for the right one. And because the truth is, the longer you ignore those subtle alarms, the more you begin to normalize them. You start convincing yourself that relationships are supposed to be this hard, that love is supposed to feel like suffering, that constant disappointment is just part of the package. But deep down, a part of you remembers that love isn't meant to feel like walking on shards of glass. Love, real love, doesn't make you doubt yourself every night before you fall asleep. It doesn't leave you replaying every text message in your mind, wondering if you said too much, if you were too available, or if you should have just kept quiet. And forcing a relationship is exhausting because it puts you in a never-ending performance. You start editing who you are, not out of growth, but out of fear. Instead of showing up authentically, you become hyper-focused on saying the right thing, doing the right thing, being the version of yourself you think will keep them from pulling away. That constant performance doesn't just rob the relationship of authenticity, it robs you of peace. And peace is the foundation of love. If you can't rest in who you are without fear of losing them, you're not in a partnership, you're in a prison of self-denial. And another sign you're forcing it is when their bare minimum feels like a grand gesture, a simple text back, a quick call. One night of affection suddenly feels monumental because you've been starved of consistency. Think about that for a second. If crumbs feel like a feast, what does that say about the table you've been sitting at? True love doesn't keep you starving and then reward you with occasional scraps of effort. It nourishes you consistently. It shows up not because it's convenient, but because it's committed. And notice how often you're in a cycle of highs and lows. The highs feel intoxicating. When they're present, when they finally give you attention, it feels like the world makes sense again. You feel validated, reassured, hopeful. But then the lows creep in, their distance, their indifference, their absence, and suddenly you're plummeting, trying to claw your way back to the high. That cycle is addictive, but it's not sustainable. It keeps you hooked, not because of love, but because of the uncertainty. You're not bonded by trust. You're trapped by volatility. And then here's something important. When you're with the wrong person, you stop recognizing yourself. Maybe you were once confident, playful, vibrant, full of life, but now you find yourself anxious, second-guessing, insecure. You wonder what happened to the version of you who felt unstoppable, and you blame yourself for becoming this smaller version. But the truth is, love should amplify who you are, not diminish you. If you're shrinking inside your relationship, it's not because you've lost yourself, it's because you're in a place that doesn't allow you to shine. And have you noticed how much energy you spend trying to decode them? You analyze every pause, every emoji, every delay in response. You become a detective, searching for clues to prove they still care, to prove you're not imagining their distance. But relationships aren't supposed to be unsolvable puzzles. You shouldn't need to be Sherlock Holmes to understand where you stand. Real connection is clarity. It's straightforward. It doesn't leave you guessing whether you're valued or disposable. And when you're forcing a relationship, your body knows before your mind admits it. Pay attention to how you feel when you're around them. Does your chest tighten? Do you feel like you're holding your breath, waiting for approval, waiting for affection? Do you feel more relaxed when they're not around? Because at least you're not on edge. Your body whispers the truth long before your brain rationalizes it away. And if being with someone brings more tension than relief, more anxiety than calm, that's not chemistry, it's chaos. And think about how many times you've said they'll change. How many times you've convinced yourself that if you're patient enough, if you love hard enough, if you hold on long enough, they'll finally rise to meet you. But here's the reality. People don't change because you wish they would. They change when they decide to, and sometimes they never do. And if your happiness is perpetually on layaway, waiting for the version of them that doesn't exist, you'll spend your life waiting instead of living. And another sign you're forcing it is when your boundaries are constantly tested. Maybe you said you wouldn't accept being cancelled on last minute, yet here you are forgiving it again. Maybe you said you wouldn't tolerate disrespect, yet you explain away the harsh words every time you bend your boundaries just to keep them around. You teach them that your standards aren't real. And worse, you teach yourself that your own lines don't matter. Over time, you lose trust, not just in them, but in yourself, because you know you're betraying your own values. And forcing a relationship also makes you obsessed with potential instead of presence. You think about what they could be if they just tried. You hold on to the glimpses of kindness, the rare moments of connection, and you inflate them into the whole picture. But if someone only shows up for you occasionally, that's not potential. That's inconsistency. You deserve someone whose best qualities aren't hidden in rare appearances but lived out eves, day. And notice the silence in your own soul. The moments where you know this doesn't feel right, but you push the thought away. That inner voice, the one that whispers, you deserve more. That's the part of you still fighting for your worth. Forcing a relationship means ignoring that voice, silencing it in exchange for temporary comfort. But every time you quiet your intuition, you distance yourself from the truth, and the truth never goes away. It waits for you until you're ready to hear it. And sometimes the most painful sign is how lonely you feel in their presence. Think about it. You're lying next to them, you're out at dinner, you're sitting on the couch together, and yet you feel unseen, unheard, untouched. That loneliness cuts deeper than being alone because it convinces you that even intimacy can't save you from isolation. And that's when you realize it's not about being with someone, it's about being with the right someone. And here's something people don't often talk about. When you're forcing a relationship, your dreams start to shrink. You lower your expectations, not just of them, but of life. You stop imagining the love you truly want because you're too busy surviving the one you're in. You settle into good enough and you tell yourself it's better than nothing. But mediocrity in love doesn't just limit your relationship, it limits your future. Because the energy you waste holding on to the wrong person is energy you could be pouring into building the life and the love you actually want. And have you noticed how often you feel relief when they cancel plans? That flicker of freedom when you don't have to perform, don't have to walk on eggshells, don't have to feel the sting of their indifference for one more night. That's not love. Love should be something you look forward to, not something you secretly escape. And then sometimes the biggest sig, N, is silence, not theirs but yours. You stop talking about your relationship to your friends because you know what they'll say. You stop sharing your struggles because you don't want to hear the truth reflected back at you. You isolate yourself, not because you're happy, but because you're ashamed of admitting how unhappy you really are. That silence isn't peace, it's avoidance. And at its core, forcing a relationship means you're fighting reality. You're fighting who they are. You're fighting what you know deep down. You're fighting yourself. And reality always wins. The more you resist it, the more drained you become. The moment you stop fighting, the moment you finally let go, you don't just lose the wrong relationship, you regain yourself. And because love, real love, doesn't require constant justification, it doesn't feel like an uphill battle every single day. It doesn't leave you questioning whether you're enough. It doesn't ask you to abandon yourself to keep someone else. Real love meets you halfway. Real love fuels you, strengthens you, expands you. And when you find yourself in a situation where none of that exists, no matter how much you want it to, you have to be brave enough to admit you're forcing something that isn't meant for you. And once you come to terms with that reality, you start to see how much of your energy has been consumed by trying to hold together something that should have been effortless in its foundation. You realize how many nights you've stayed awake, waiting for a text that never came, how many mornings you woke up already bracing yourself for disappointment, how many weekends you spent hoping they'd finally prioritize you. That's not love, that's survival mode. It's living in a constant state of scarcity, waiting for scraps of attention to remind you that you still matter to them. But you should never need to beg to matter. And forcing a relationship is like trying to squeeze into shoes that don't fit. At first, you convince yourself that if you just break them in, they'll become comfortable. You wear them despite the blisters, despite the discomfort, telling yourself they'll eventually mold to your feet. But what ends up happening is you hurt yourself the longer you keep them on. And isn't that the same as love? You think that if you just stick it out long enough, if you just endure the pain, eventually things will click. But some relationships aren't meant to fit, no matter how hard you try. The cost of forcing it is your own comfort, your own joy, your own self-worth. And one of the most dangerous illusions in this space is the belief that if I let go, I'll never find anyone else. That fear keeps so many people shackled to the wrong person, but that belief isn't truth, it's a trap. Because the truth is, holding on to the wrong relationship actually blocks the right one from finding you. It consumes your heart, your time, and your energy so completely that there's no room for someone who would truly see you, love you, and choose you. It's like trying to fill a cup that's already overflowing with the wrong thing. There's no space left for what you deserve. And if you've ever noticed, when you're forcing a relationship, your life outside of it starts to shrink too. You pull away from friends because you're embarrassed to admit what's really happening. You lose motivation for your passions because all of your focus is on maintaining the relationship. You stop taking care of yourself the way you used to because you're constantly drained. Slowly you begin to abandon your own identity. And here's the irony. You thought you were fighting for the relationship, but what you were really losing was yourself. And think about the conversations you've been having with yourself. How often do you say, it's not that bad? How often do you convince yourself that every couple struggles or no relationship is perfect? Of course, no relationship is perfect, but there's a difference between normal challenges and constant pain. There's a difference between two people working through obstacles together and one person carrying the entire weight of the relationship while the other drifts further away. If you have to spend more time justifying the relationship than enjoying it, that's a clear sign you're forcing it. And when you're with the wrong person, your standards start to erode little by little. You accept behaviors you swore you'd never tolerate. You give passes for things that used to be deal breakers. You settle for less than you know you deserve, because you've become accustomed to disappointment. And the danger is, the longer you stay, the more those lowered standards become your new normal. You start to believe that's all there is. But deep down, you know you've compromised too much when you can barely recognize the person you've become. And let's talk about hope, the most intoxicating drug in a forced relationship. Hope can keep you chained for years. The hope that they'll wake up one morning and realize how lucky they are. The hope that one day they'll finally give you the love you've been giving them. Hope makes you tolerate behavior that tears you apart because you're clinging to the possibility of change. But ask yourself this: how long have you been hoping? How many months, how many years have you held on to the idea of who they could be instead of seeing who they are right now? Hope without action, without real change, is just another way of keeping you stuck. And there's also the way you start to silence your own truth just to avoid rocking the boat. You tell yourself, I won't bring it up because I don't want to push them away. You hold back your feelings, your needs, your desires because you're terrified that expressing them will cost you the relationship. But what you don't realize is that by silencing yourself, you've already lost the relationship. Because a love the sursamais to us, it requires you to hide who you are isn't love, it's self-abandonment. And then there's the subtle erosion of trust. Not just trust in them, but trust in yourself. You start to question your own intuition. You feel the red flags waving in your gut, but you convince yourself you're being paranoid, insecure, or needy. You gaslight yourself into ignoring what you know deep down to be true. But your intuition is not lying to you, it's your compass. Every time you override it, you lose a little more faith in yourself. And one of the greatest tragedies of forcing a relationship is that you walk away not only hurt by them, but disconnected from your own inner guidance. And look at the energy dynamic. Are you chasing more than you're being pursued? Do you find yourself constantly initiating, constantly following up, constantly trying to pull them closer, while they give just enough to keep you around, but never enough to make you feel secure? That imbalance is a clear sign of forcing. Love should not feel like a chase. Love should feel like two people meeting in the middle, not one person running while the other barely takes a step. And another quiet but powerful sign is the absence of growth. Healthy relationships expand you. They challenge you to be better, but in ways that feel inspiring, not diminishing. They push you toward your goals, support your passions, encourage your dreams. But when you're forcing a relationship, you often find yourself shrinking instead of growing. You give up opportunities to avoid conflict. You stop pursuing your own path because you're too busy trying to hold on to theirs. And soon you look back and realize that while you were fighting to keep the relationship alive, your own life was standing still. And ask yourself, when was the last time you truly felt safe in this relationship? Not just physically, but emotionally. When was the last time you felt like you could exhale, like you could be fully yourself without fear of rejection or ridicule? If you can't remember, that's not love. Love should feel like home, not like a battlefield. And then it's not just about what you feel in the relationship, it's about how you feel when you imagine the future. Do you feel excitement, possibility, a sense of building together? Or do you feel dread, heaviness, uncertainty? Your vision of the future is a reflection of the reality of your present. If you can't picture a joyful, fulfilling future with this person, it's because your soul knows that what you have now can't sustain you long term. And you may even notice that your joy depends on their validation. When they give you attention, you're on top of the world. When they withdraw, you crash. Your emotional state becomes entirely dependent on their moods, their affection, their presence. That's not partnership, that's dependency. And it's dangerous because it teaches you to outsource your worth to someone else. But your worth has never been in their hands, it has always been in yours. And perhaps the hardest truth of all is this. Sometimes the reason you're forcing a relationship is because you're afraid of being alone. But being alone is not the worst thing. Being with someone who makes you feel alone while lying right next to them, that's worse. Being with someone who drains your spirit, who keeps you small, who leaves you questioning yourself every day, that's worse. Loneliness in a relationship is far more painful than solitude outside of one. And so when you start to recognize these signs, when you start to feel the weight of everything you've been forcing, you have to ask yourself, what am I really holding on to? Am I holding on to love, or am I holding on to fear? Am I holding on to hope, or am I holding on to habit? Am I holding on to them, or am I holding on to the illusion of what I thought this could be? The courage to answer those questions honestly is what sets you free. And because when you truly look to what you're holding on to, you often realize it's not even the person anymore. It's the story. It's the narrative you built in your mind of what this relationship was supposed to be, how it was supposed to unfold, how they were supposed to love you. You're clinging to the fantasy more than the reality. And that's what makes it so hard to let go. You're not just saying goodbye to them. You're saying goodbye to the version of life you imagined with them. But ask yourself, what is more painful, grieving the fantasy of a future that never existed, or continuing to live in a present that's draining the very essence of who you are? And when you're forcing a relationship, your identity gets entangled with their approval. You start to define yourself through their eyes. If they compliment you, you glow. If they withdraw, you feel worthless. Your confidence rises and falls depending on how much they choose to acknowledge you that day. But that's not love. That's dependency masquerading as intimacy. The truth is, the right relationship doesn't make you forget your worth. It reminds you of it daily. It doesn't give you an identity. It celebrates the one you already have. And there's also a shift that happens when you're forcing it. You stop listening to yourself and start living on their terms. You choose restaurants they like, hobbies they enjoy, friends they approve of. Slowly, your world begins to revolve entirely around theirs. You think this is compromise, but compromise isn't about losing yourself. It's about blending two lives while still honoring your individuality. If your identity is dissolving into theirs, you're not compromising, you're disappearing. And once you disappear in a relationship, you're no longer being loved for who you are, but for the version of you that serves their comfort. And then sometimes it's not even about obvious disrespect. It's about the absence of enthusiasm. Pay attention to how excited they are to see you, to talk to you, to share life with you. If you feel like you're always begging for enthusiasm, always searching for sparks in someone who treats you like an afterthought, that's a quiet but powerful sign. Love may not always be fireworks, but it should never feel like indifference. Because indifference is the slowest kind of heartbreak. It chips away at you, one unreturned call, one distracted conversation, one half-hearted hug at a time. And when you're forcing a relationship, you also find yourself in a cycle of proving that you're worth staying for, proving that you're not too much, proving that you're patient enough, loyal enough, strong enough to endure the lack of reciprocity. But love isn't supposed to be a courtroom where you're constantly making a case for why you deserve to be there. Love is not earned through exhaustion. It's shared through mutual desire. If you have to convince someone to see your value, they've already missed the point. And then comes the silence of self-betrayal, the moments where you know deep down this isn't right, but you stay anyway. The times you catch yourself thinking, I deserve more than this, but immediately push it aside because the thought of leaving terrifies you. That's not loyalty, it's fear disguised as devotion, and fear is a terrible foundation for love. Because fear keeps you trapped in places your soul is begging you to leave. And think about the way you feel when you imagine letting go. There's fear, of course, fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of never finding someone else. But beneath that fear, there's also a whisper of relief. That whisper is your freedom calling you back. It's the part of you that remembers who you were before you started shrinking yourself to fit into this relationship. It's the part of you that knows you deserve peace more than chaos, love more than crumbs, freedom more than chains. And another truth you have. It to face is this: when you're forcing a relationship, you're often in love with their potential, not their reality. You see glimpses of who they could be, the kind words on a good day, the moments of connection when they let their guard down, the rare nights when they give you the affection you crave, and you hold on to those glimpses like lifelines. But you can't build a future on moments, you build it on patterns. And if their pattern is inconsistency, indifference, or neglect, then the potential you're clinging to is nothing more than an illusion. And notice the toll it takes on your spirit. How often do you feel lighter when you're away from them, but heavy again when you're near? How often do you feel more yourself in solitude than in their company? Relationships are supposed to make you feel expanded, not diminished. They're supposed to bring out your laughter, not suppress it. They're supposed to add to your life, not drain it of energy. If being with them feels like carrying a weight you can't put down, that's not partnership. It's burden. And there's also a pattern of overcompensation. When you're forcing it, you become the fixer, the planner, the one who smooths things over. You write the long texts to explain. You rearrange your schedule to accommodate. You apologize even when you did nothing wrong. You believe that if you just keep fixing, keep giving, keep proving, eventually things will balance. But overcompensation doesn't create balance. It creates resentment because you end up drained, exhausted, and unappreciated while they remain comfortable giving the bare minimum. And ask yourself, do you like who you are in this relationship? Do you like the version of you that's always anxious, always chasing, always doubting, always bending? Or do you miss the version of yourself who was bold, confident, alive? The right relationship doesn't make you miss you, ourself. It makes you more of yourself. It amplifies your strengths and softens your insecurities. If instead you're constantly mourning the person you used to be, that's a sign the relationship is costing you too much. And the truth is, when you're forcing a relationship, you're betraying the part of you that longs for ease. Love isn't meant to be perfect, but it is meant to flow. It's meant to be two people choosing each other without constant resistance. It's meant to feel like a partnership, not a project. And when you catch yourself always trying to fix, to convince, to hold together something that keeps unraveling, you're not in love, you're in labor. And love shouldn't feel like labor. And sometimes you even start to envy other relationships. You see couples laughing effortlessly, holding hands without hesitation, looking at each other with genuine joy. And instead of feeling happy for them, you feel a pang of sadness. You wonder, why can't mine be like that? But that sadness is not jealousy, it's clarity. It's your soul reminding you that what you want is possible, but not with someone who refuses to meet you where you are. And then perhaps the most heartbreaking realization is this: the love you're trying to squeeze out of the wrong person is love you already carry within yourself. You're searching for validation that you've been capable of giving yourself all along. You're begging for attention when you already know how to create a fulfilling life. The reason it hurts so much is because you've forgotten your own power in the process of trying to force theirs. But the moment you stop forcing, the moment you choose yourself, that power begins to return. And so if you find yourself exhausted, if you find yourself shrinking, if you find yourself clinging to potential instead of living in reality, it's time to ask a different question. Not, how can I make them stay? But why am I fighting so hard for someone who doesn't fight for me? Not, how do I keep this alive? But what would my life look like if I poured this energy into myself instead? The answers may terrify you at first, but they'll also set you free, because the relationship you're forcing is not the love you deserve. The love you deserve is waiting on the other side of your courage,